Welcome to the Podgress Report. I wanted to take a minute before this episode to simply thank you for listening to the Podgress Report, for subscribing, for sharing it with other people who might benefit from the research and the journalists and the authors and the success stories that we bring weekly to this podcast, all on the topic of workplace wellness, how to lead, how to be the CEO of you.com. We're building a strong community of people dedicated to a healthier what's next and a healthier workplace. Thanks for being a part of it. And now, today's episode. Here's a wellness at work fact. Even with proactive health measures and professional support, a percentage of us will require time away from work to recover from mental health issues or burnout, the very same way that a percentage of us will need time away to deal with other medical health concerns. And for those people suffering mental health concerns, it's important that you know the resources and the benefit options that are available. Options from extended absences or sabbaticals to a formal mental health leave and potentially disability pay. Our guest today recently wrote a very compelling article for the Wall Street Journal that highlights some eye-opening data, finding that claims for paid time off for mental health conditions are denied at higher rates than straight medical claims. Today, we are joined by Lauren Weber. Lauren is a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. She writes about workplace issues and employment. Her work covers workplace development and contingent work and the intersection of economic trends and the workplace. But it was her recent article that prompted me to reach out to her to ask her to please join us on the Podgress Report. The article was powerfully named "The Battle Over Disability Pay and Mental Health Leave." And that is something that I know for those of you who are listening, who are struggling potentially with, I don't feel very good right now at work and I don't know exactly what to do about it. This is probably a road that mentally you have traveled down. And this is a person in Lauren that can really help us navigate through what she found, what the numbers are, and then we'll talk at the end about what we can do about it. A caveat here. This is a US-based group of data and really a US-focused bit of research. However, the global numbers on workplace wellness are all pretty dire. So if you are one of the 11% of people that listen to this podcast that are outside of the US, I still think there's going to be value in it for you today. So stick around. We're going to talk about what you can do as a leader and as a worker to help prepare yourself to build and flourish in a more healthy workplace. And these numbers will help us. Welcome, Lauren. And thank you so much for being here and for this incredible article that you've put together in the Wall Street Journal and just for taking the time out to talk to us. Thanks for being here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh my gosh, of course. The first question that I have for you is, what prompted this article? What made you think this is something that needs to be written about?
So like you said, I write about workplace and employment issues. And last year, I wrote a story about people being called to come back to the office after having worked remotely. And as a response to that, there were a lot of disability complaints being filed where somebody would request an accommodation and say, I need to work from home, either full-time or on a hybrid basis. And for various reasons, I have PTSD or ADHD. I need the environment of my home. I need to be near my dog, all kinds of things. Right. And companies were denying, a lot of companies, I'm sure, were accommodating those requests. And in some cases, they were denying them. And so some of these individuals were filing complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or their state human rights commission for disability discrimination. So I wrote that story, and after it came out, I got not a lot, meaning 3 or 4 people contacted me and said, you really should look into disability benefits because I was put through the ringer when I tried to apply for these benefits for a leave of absence I needed to take for mental health reasons. And basically, Hearing from 3 or 4 readers who had a similar experience is actually a fairly high number. I wish people reached out to me more often when they've got an issue, and I try to put my email address out there so people can find me. So I took it seriously when I heard this. I started looking into it, and I found that there were a number of complaints. There were a lot of lawyers out there who advocate for people who are getting denied their disability benefits. And it started to become clear that employers, or not so much employers, their insurers and their third-party administrators who make the benefit decisions, did seem to be treating mental health claims differently than a straight physical or medical claim. So I wanted to look into that.
What you found when you started looking into is there a there with these mental health claims was really that, yes, more employees than ever are seeking this time off, and an elevation of the percentage of mental health claims that are being raised over time in comparison to, say, the early 2000s, I think is where you were citing. Between 7 and 10% of all disability claims now are these mental health related disability claims, whereas in the early 2000s, it was like 4%. So there is a marked change. That's a big change. You tried to get into the data of, so what happened next? And is there really a there with the rate of approval or disapproval of these claims? And what did you find as you started to dig into that?
Yeah. So actually what clinched to me that there's a story here was that I heard from a woman who wouldn't even give me her real name. And I won't say the company that she worked for, but a very large company that everybody's heard of. She said, I had to take a leave of absence for mental health reasons this year. And it's been a nightmare trying to get this through, get to an approval. What was interesting about her situation was that a few years earlier, she had a medical claim and she had no issues. It sailed through. She got the time off that she needed. She got the benefits that she needed, which was the income replacement piece of this, which is what the disability benefits are for.
Right.
And so in that one person, and I sure wish she had been willing to go on the record because her situation really perfectly illustrated what the issue is here. Now, the broader context is that there is a mental health crisis in this country. It was certainly happening before the pandemic, and of course, the pandemic exacerbated a lot of this. Now, part of it is people have better access to care. There's higher rates of diagnosis, partly because there's better access to care, even though a lot of people still do have trouble accessing therapists or other care that they need. But it is really clear we have a mental health crisis. I think the most recent government statistics are that 1 in 5 American adults over the age of 18 qualifies as having a mental health disorder. A smaller number qualify as having a severe mental health disorder where you can't function, or your basic functioning is compromised. But anyway, I've been interested in writing stories about how this intersects with the workplace and the fact that employers now do view it as their responsibility. Many employers, not every employer, view it as their responsibility to, on some level, care for that element of their workers. So I was interested in the fact that, a lot of companies extended new benefits. They added new sessions. You can have 10 sessions instead of 8 sessions with your employee assistance program, which provides counseling usually. You can have a subscription to an app that will help you sleep better or do meditation, all these things. But here were these cases where people were having true crises. And that's where the rubber hits the road. And in some ways, they were just running up against a system that operated the way it always had. Now, you had asked me about the data piece. That was the hard thing. And being the Wall Street Journal, we try not to do stories by anecdote. Like, I heard this from a couple people, so it must be a problem. There's a high bar for making sure that what we're writing is it's a meaningful trend or something meaningful is going on. Very few places seem to track insurance approvals and denials. I talked to industry groups, I talked to academics, I talked to the companies themselves, and just kept hitting walls. Insurance companies don't have to report this data to the government. I talked to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, which is for state insurance commissioners. They don't gather this data. The Labor Department does not gather it, even though they oversee ERISA. The Labor Department doesn't collect this data on how many people's claims are being denied. And so that was the stumbling block here. And it took many months. And eventually one of the companies that I had been in touch with shared their data with me. And it showed that, in fact, I think it was something like 18% of all disability claims are denied. When it's mental health conditions at issue, it's 30% of all claims. So once we had that data in hand, we felt we had enough to go on to finish the story.
So you had the anecdotal and you had the reported, hey, I experienced this firsthand at my company, and I was really going through the gauntlet, and it was time for me to take, for my own mental health, which is health, take a step away. My doctor, my care team supported me in this and said, yes, it was necessary, but I couldn't get through, or I had a real struggle getting through the process. And you cover a couple of folks that couldn't get through the process, some that did successfully get through the process, and then some that got through the process, but not in the way that they had originally expected. All of that sounds like a heavy lift for folks that are at the end of their resilience. But then to hear that you got the data back that says, yeah, when for medical claims, you have about an 18% rate that will be declined. But when it comes to mental health, it's 30%. That is remarkable. Why do you think that is? I'm sure next, did you say, well, why is that? What happened when you chased that down?
Yes, that is part of the job. I talked to lots of people who work on the insurance side. Sometimes it's an insurer that's actually paying the benefit that makes these decisions. And often for large companies, they fund the benefits themselves, but they outsource the decision-making to what's called a third-party administrator or a TPA. I talked to a lot of companies. I talked to industry groups, et cetera. And what I would often hear is, well, it is very hard to judge the severity of a mental health disorder. A lot of this is subjective. The documentation is often not there. That came up a lot. And in fact, the TPA that did share their data with me, when I asked, why do these numbers look the way they do? They said often the problem is documentation. And that the therapist or the medical provider, psychiatrist in some cases, didn't show in the documents that they provided that this person really can't do their job.
The Podgress Report is brought to you by me. Supporting this passion project by subscribing means I can continue bringing you incredible guests, their success stories, the latest research, and experts on healthy work, career development, entrepreneurism, and solopreneurism. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the report.
So,
why do you think that is? What did you find when you looked into that?
It's really interesting. I got a lot of great response to the story and specifically to the LinkedIn post that I wrote about it. And I heard from someone who had been in the industry for many, many years. And we had a conversation and she said a lot of it is because the providers, the therapists or the psychiatrists are trying to protect their clients' privacy. So it's they're mindful of HIPAA regulations. You have to protect your client's confidentiality and privacy. So she was saying as a result of that, often the documents are kind of skimpy, or the documentation is skimpy. There's not enough information that they provide, or they'll use terminology, or they'll say things that might be adequate in certain situations, but they don't understand the insurance context and what it takes to actually get a claim approved. And so they're not providing enough information. So that is certainly a piece of it. And then I think it is undeniable that insurance companies, they're in a business relationship, and the TPAs, they're in a business relationship with their customer. Their customer is the employer. It's not the workers. And so as one of the lawyers I spoke to said, who represents individuals who are battling for their benefits, she said a lot of these big companies are not going to renew a contract with an insurance provider or a TPA that's making them write a lot of checks. That's relatively cynical, but it's a business. I can't speak to that exactly. There's no evidence that these claims are being turned down for cynical reasons, but I think you have to be mindful of that business relationship.
That feels a bit fraught only because I think about, 7 to 10% of all claims are mental health related claims, which means 90% aren't. And yet they have almost double. I'm really taking your numbers and kind of twisting them a teeny bit, but almost double the decline rate. So that's at a max, let's say, what is that? 4.5% of overall claims being declined or not being approved. So that doesn't feel like a huge cost savings to the company, but it is still disturbing. So no matter, I guess, the root cause, the documentation being insufficient is an easy way to go to the no.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's good to know that. And it's good for people that are at that point to understand that so that they can help work with their provider if it comes to that, to say, we need to really make this something I'm comfortable with as your patient, but also something that's sufficient to let people evaluate the severity of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the line that I often remember is one of the insurance industry folks I spoke to, which is I quoted in the story, is like, you don't have an X-ray that shows your broken bone. I understand that there's a certain level of subjectivity to it. And you have to get at the answers in other ways because you're not going to have an MRI or an X-ray that's going to show the severity of a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, I think, where context and where really partnering with a healthcare provider gets important. Obviously, if they're supportive of you taking that time away for your own well-being, there has to be a pretty compelling reason. And if there's a compelling reason, there needs to be a way to tell that story with as much clarity as possible to support it. Something that you and I talked through was that sometimes it's easy to conflate the difference and the complexity of the resources and benefits available to employees. There's leave, there's taking leave away from work, and then there's disability. And those may, in some companies, be handled by the same organization and may not be handled by the same organization. And that adds to some of the complexity that folks are having to navigate.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. It is very confusing for people. And even after the story came out, I had a lot of people who seemed confused about some of this. So in many of in the cases that I wrote about, often the employer has already approved leave, whether it's Family Medical Leave Act leave, which, that's a federal law. It guarantees most workers your job is safe for about 3 months or 12 weeks. You can take 12 weeks of leave and it's unpaid. And that's to take care of your own medical issues or family members. That's available to people who work at companies with either 50 or more workers. So most American workers are covered by this. So your company may have approved your leave under FMLA or under their own policies. The disability benefits are the income replacement. So in many cases, you get 70% of your usual salary for some amount of time. Short-term disability is usually about 12 weeks. And then you can, if you exhaust that, you can then apply for long-term disability. Sometimes it's 60%, sometimes 70%. I think in some cases it's 100%. So yeah, there's it's confusing. Now, one of the first person that I wrote about in this story who was courageous enough to go on the record, because again, I couldn't have done this story if I didn't have somebody willing to go on the record and tell their story. His company continued to pay him while he was out on his leave of absence, which they had approved. And then their expectation was once the disability benefits kick in, he would repay them out of the money that would come through the disability benefits. Well, the disability benefits were ultimately denied, and then the company tried to claw back about $9,000 from him, which he didn't have. So it's just really important to remember that the disability benefits is not whether you get to take leave or not. That's just the portion that replaces your income. Now, what I've learned since writing the story and getting a lot of response from people is many people cannot afford to take this time off unless they're getting paid for it. And there are a lot of really heartbreaking stories that I've heard about people who either went back to work before they were ready or just never took a leave of absence because they couldn't afford to do this without being paid for that time.
And you and I, when we initially talked, I told you the reason it was so interesting to me was because I have people that reach out to me and I take every single one of those calls, and I'll get on a call with a person that I don't even know. And they're very upset and not sure if this is something that's available to them or how they even navigate. And again, this is a person at the end of their own resilience that's not even sure who to turn to, how to be safe, how to feel safe in their organization about talking about the moment that they're in. This is why the story resonated so much with me, because I've had enough of those conversations where I also felt there's a there, and this felt incredibly timely for me, and having all of these conversations with people that are like, I think this is something I may have to do. I don't feel I can physically go on anymore because of my mental health challenges, and didn't know what to do or what was available to them. So really good to understand and to get down to the distinction of, yes, FMLA exists. Yes, disability may or may not exist at your company. And those are two separate things, and you will have to navigate both if you, and most people will, like you're saying, want to be paid for that time away to work on your mental health.
Mm-hmm, right. Oh, and you had asked how many workers have access to it. So according to the Labor Department, about 40% of U.S. private sector workers have access to disability insurance, disability benefits. In some cases, the employer pays the premium. My employer does that. I don't pay anything out of pocket for that. But in some cases, it's offered as a voluntary benefit, and you can choose it, and then you pay the premium yourself.
Got it. So again, really important for all of us, understand what benefits are available to you, and for you that are leaders in an organization, either people managers, people leaders, leaders of leaders, to understand what is the truth within the doors of my company, whether it's your own company or the company where you work, what's available to you. Then tell them again for the employees that are on your particular team, so they also understand, because you don't know when they're going to be ready to receive that information, but it's important that people know at least how to find it. I'm not saying in every team meeting you're bringing this up, but they need to know at least where to go to get this information. Again, I'm telling you this because I have talked to some employees that were not my employees that don't even know where to start to look for that information or how to find that information inside the doors of their company or their job. So we talked a little bit about the subjectivity challenge. It's not exactly a broken hip or a heart condition that you need to take the time away. It's something that is less easy to get uber crisp on. This is the rightest course of action. Why it feels more like front and center today is because there is a greater prevalence of these mental health concerns, an increasing prevalence of these mental health concerns. We talked a little bit about the morass of paperwork. You did mention something that I wanted to revisit, which is this limited expertise from the provider to do the sufficient documentation of the challenge. And that was a leading cause for these higher denials that you were finding when you were saying, really, what was the reason the denial? It did many times come down to that. What would your recommendation be, or what was the recommendation of the folks that you were talking with to remedy that, to make a better submission?
Mm-hmm. So some of the insurers and third-party administrators, I think, have checklists that they give to providers or basically try to be clearer about the information that they need to provide. I don't know how common that is, but I think it's ideally you want to get on the phone with someone at the TPA or the insurer. So for example, I spoke to somebody after the story ran who reached out to me, and she had worked in this industry. And then she herself had to take a leave to manage some trauma and stress that she was experiencing. And she was denied, and here she is. She's in the industry. She works in the disability benefits industry. So she called the administrator of the claim and said, "You need to talk to my doctor." So the person got on the phone with her doctor and the claim was approved. The same thing happened, like they tried to cut off her benefits, the administrator, and she said, "Please talk to my doctor." So she really advocated for herself. It was clear she understands the industry, but that really helped. So even if your doctor's not necessarily doesn't know what to put in the forms, if you can connect the TPA or the insurer with your medical provider to have that kind of conversation, I think that makes a big difference.
I want to really home in on that because I do think that you said something so important there, which is the word that you used was advocate. And I do believe that sounds very important, meaning many times when we're just doing, let's say we did get the checklist and we're doing the checklist, the psychiatrist, the mental health professional sends in the package of paper or has their office send in the package of paper. And it's like, okay, now the ball is in that court. That might not be enough of a volley to actually win the match. And again, we're talking about people that are going through a condition that needs time away from work. And so I love the idea of either yourself or another advocate saying, "I need you to speak with my physician." It's very similar to sometimes when you have that one test you need for a medical condition and you get the initial decline. I've had this happen with my own parents where you have to get on the line and really just advocate on their behalf. I think it's the same in this situation. You also mentioned to me that potentially that can be something that if you feel comfortable enough with it, that you can also have maybe your leadership at the company lean in and do some advocating as well. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, the insurance company or the TPA is working for the employer.
Right.
And I did hear of situations where somebody would get a denial and the manager, the head of the company, whoever, would call the TPA and say, "This is a valued employee. We want you to approve this claim. We don't want to lose this person." I heard that. It was kind of like third hand, but apparently that can happen. So yeah, I think like you said, if you're comfortable asking your leadership to advocate for you, that can't hurt and it can help.
Right. We've talked a lot about your findings, some of the people that you had the opportunity to speak with, people that were trying to navigate through the system, people that work within the system, the companies that leverage the systems. Coming out of that, you mentioned to me that you believe that the companies are really in the right place. They understand the importance of mental health in the workplace, but the breakdown is happening more in the system. The system is challenging to navigate at best.
So first of all, this is all like a lot of generalizations. I think a lot of employers, a lot of companies really do, care that their employees are doing okay, not to mention they need them to be doing okay.
Right.
It's not good business to have some portion of your workforce barely functional. I think there are companies that are very sincere about it. I'm sure there are companies that pay lip service to it, maybe,
right.
And really I am talking about companies, but I think so much of this comes down to, managers, right. Individual managers.
Well, this is where I'm going with this.
So, okay, yes, good. So we're going down the same path.
Yeah.
So yes, now I will say, like, just seeing the comments and the emails I've gotten, the conversations I've had since the story ran, there's just a real fundamental problem, which is that businesses are businesses and people are not units of labor. People are complicated, complex, unpredictable. Even when everything is supposed to be going right and the person gets the help they need and they come back to work and they're ready, who knows that whatever they're struggling with is not going to recur in 6 weeks later or however many weeks later. I mean, people are just not programmable in that way. And
yeah, newsflash, people aren't robots, right?
Yes,
like
exactly.
So I mean, like, oh, big surprise, we're human.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I hear what you're saying. You might go and take the time and be away and get the help and come back into a situation that potentially exacerbates something that you were well on the way to healing or repairing. So absolutely agree that people are human and that companies are trying to get just the right blend of units of work. Unfortunately, they're strapped to human beings.
Right.
I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but yes, it can get a little lost in translation that these are people that have their whole life going on. And you wrote this beautifully in the article itself, where the whole life is going on outside of that screen that you see, where the person, when you have them on a 30-minute meeting, looks fantastic, happy, smiling. And then it took them all day to psych themselves up for that. So like we've all been there in one level or another. But yes, we're just people doing the best that we can.
Yeah.
So the company is trying to hit their metrics and the people are trying to live a well-rounded life. And the middle bit where we have to make our way through this system of evaluation of where we're broken mentally and need repairing is daunting. And like you've written in the article, some people had the ability to get through it and some people it was more than they could handle.
Now, I just want to add another question that came up while I was writing this and we were going through edits is like, how much of these complaints are fraud or claims, not complaints, but claims? Is it possible that these claims are going up because people are like, oh, I'd like to take some time off, and so they're fraudulent claims? I'm sure that happens, but I think it's sort of a problematic attitude to go into it thinking that this accounts for the increase in claims or the increase in denials or whatever. And I asked this of some of my insurance sources, and they were like, no, one of them said, I think it's just really awareness. People are more aware of their mental health. They're more aware of the benefits. So you see more claims. I just want to say, I'm sure there are fraudulent claims that happen, but I think it's dangerous to go into something like this thinking like, oh, well, that must be the majority of what's happening.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because potentially where that comes from is, why is this happening all of a sudden now? Or suddenly, why do we see more of this happening? Well, Gallup's State of the Global Workplace shows us that the collective mood of the global workplace has soured to a point where it has never been. And Gallup does the largest study of this kind yearly that is done in the world. And they are throwing up fire signs saying, hey, we're really seeing some struggles. Further to that data is then used by other organizations. One of them is the UN, one of them is Oxford. And the UN Development Program put out another warning sign, which is I'm reading this because I want to get it right. People's mental well-being has been worsening. In the last 10 years, the number of people expressing stress, sadness, anxiety, anger, or worry has been on the rise, reaching its highest levels since the Gallup surveys began. So if it seems like more is happening, yes, maybe it is because there's an awareness, but also I think it's more prevalent. The data say it's more prevalent than it has ever been.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand the question, and I admit potentially there is fraud there, just as if potentially there's fraud with folks taking time away for a back that's not actually hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that we leave people with some really strong food for thought for both people that may be experiencing some concerns or anxiety or some of that mental unwellness, and for leaders. You and I had talked about the idea of don't start this process when you've already been trying to power through for months and months and months and months. I have an episode, which I'm going to link in the notes, that helps do low lift ways that you can start down the path to recovery before you're getting to this point. The goal is avoid this point, but prioritizing your wellness starting today, no matter where you are, if some of this is resonating with you, if this is something that is a glimmering thought that comes into your mind, start today. And there are low lift things that you can do, free low lift things that you can do to start today. So if you don't have the energy to put out a ton of effort, I've got you. These are things this is science-backed things you can do to help your wellness. The other thing is get that team, build that team of advocates before you need it, which means you have to get a little brave and talk to people. And that might mean you have to talk to one person to just break the seal, but open your mouth and talk to people. Ideally, you'll be talking to your mental health provider or to at least your general practitioner to help you. And potentially, if you feel like you can build the trust there with your leader to let them know. So it's not coming out of the blue. Even if you never get to that point, they understand. I look great on camera, but I've got some things going on. And then for leaders, what do you recommend leaders might be doing to help understand and help their teams understand how to navigate?
I think part of it is just an attitude of I'm here to help my people thrive. I'm not here to punish people. I'm not here to discipline people. I'm not here to do that part. Like, how do I help my people thrive? I think that goes a long way when you have a manager whose approach is that. And then I was talking yesterday actually to someone who had reached out to me after the story ran, and she had just been through the ringer, just a terrible, heartbreaking story. One of her children had passed away. She just had a lot of stuff going on. She went through this process of applying for disability after her son's death and needing time off. She was in a severe depression, lots of things. And I said to her, what would have made it easier? What would have changed this? And because her benefits were ultimately approved. She said, I wish there had been someone to guide me through some of this. I wish my company had had someone whose job was to help employees figure out what are the deadlines I need to meet, what's the paperwork I need to fill out, all that kind of thing. That made a lot of sense. And she worked for a big company. I know big companies have entire staffs dedicated to leave and absence management, but a lot of times they're working with vendors. They're working on the sort of paperwork and administrative side.
So glad you brought that up, because I had an employee that was going through a considerable medical concern, and just the support that I leaned in to give support because it was serious and it was fast moving, and had to spend time navigating. Again, this was more even on the leave side. It taught me so much as a leader to say, just like you said, I want my team to thrive. And now that I know that this type of engagement is required, I'm going to make relationships with these people in these offices inside of the doors of the company so that I can be better at this and more proactive at it next time. And this is why, to you leaders who are out there, just at least understanding, do we have people that will help us with that? If we do not, what can I learn if I've got a team of people to help them navigate through some of this? I think that's really incredibly important, because it is different at every company. It's different from, as you said, even team to team. This is part of how teams thrive, is because they are physically and mentally well. So getting involved and invested in what are the benefits and the resources that are available to the team that I need to know about so I can help them navigate that should they need it. Thank you for bringing that up, because I do think that's incredibly important. The other bit that I want to say, don't expect that just those mindfulness and well-being apps and the additional EAP visits are going to be sufficient. Those are some of the resources, but those are not a placeholder for active and engaged management and leadership. And when you take on the role of a leader, I do think what you're saying and what you're finding is that leadership is more than hitting those company goals. It's also meeting those people, those work units where they really are, which is in the process of being whole people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, Lauren, I know we're right up against time and you are a busy lady. I am so appreciative for you being here and talking this through. Going to have the article linked in the episode notes. And like you said, you want people to know that they can reach out to you if they have questions or if they have stories they'd like to tell or tips or thoughts. So I will also link your contact information as well so they can do just that.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Wow. What a fantastic conversation with Lauren Weber today. Whether you're the person experiencing mental health challenges or you are a leader, the main takeaway from today's discussion, as I see it, is start building mental health and encouraging thriving right now. If you're struggling but still able to work, I highly encourage you to take 2 steps today. 1, listen to an episode that I've linked below, which is the 5 science-backed steps for burnout recovery. This will also benefit sufferers of stress and anxiety as well. 2, assemble your advocates. Start small, even one person, one supportive person to help your recovery efforts and step in or have your back if you need active support. Leaders, Lauren said it so powerfully today. You are here to help your people thrive. Open up the lines of communication. Know the benefits and resources available at your company. Make sure your team is aware of how to find answers when they need them. Remember what Lauren heard in the outreach immediately following this incredible article. I wish there had been someone to guide me. If you can be a guide, be ready. If you need a guide, be open. Open to asking for help or guidance. And when you need your advocates to support you, tell them. Have them at the ready. Let them know that you may call on them and how they can help. A massive thank you to Lauren Weber for this incredibly important article and for joining us here on this episode. Please share her article widely. And if you'd like to share your experience with disability pay or mental health leave or have a workplace story idea, I've added Lauren's contact details in the episode notes for you. We've got incredible guest lineups coming to you on upcoming episodes. The next episode, we have author Leidy Klotz joining us to help us all subtract, to streamline our thinking, to declutter our organizations, and to change how we see the world. If you find yourself or your organization piling on to-dos, but not considering stop-doings, you will love the very next Podgress Report. If you liked what you're hearing today, please subscribe to the Podgress Report wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss any of our upcoming reports, and consider sharing with anyone you think this content would help. If you have an episode idea, a guest suggestion, let me know by reaching out to me on LinkedIn or using the Feedback is a Gift link below to record your thoughts. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. It really means the world to me, and I hope that it also is meaningful to you. Together, we can help each other and make the workplace a better place as we grow. Until next time, here's to your progress. Hi, it's Jen with some very important fine print. This podcast and its associated properties does not provide medical or mental health advice. Nothing on the Podgress Report is intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And please, if you're under duress or considering suicide, please reach out right this very minute to the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988 in the U.S. or searching for the helplines available to you in your country.